Maximize Business Value podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition their business on their terms. Our mission was born from the lessons we've learned from over 100 business transactions, which fuels our desire to share our experiences and wisdom so you can succeed. Now here's your host, CEO of Mastery Partners, Tom Bronson.
Hi, this is Tom Bronson, and welcome to Maximize Business Value, a podcast for business owners who are passionate about building long-term sustainable value in their business. This episode is part of our series on books written by Certified Exit Planning Advisors, or CEPAs. Now, I obtained my CEPA certification in 2019. Earlier this year, I was invited to participate with other CEPA authors in the Author Showcase at the Exit Planning Conference in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I picked up some great books. In this episode, I'd like to welcome our guest, Julie Keyes, a certified exit planner, a certified exit planning advisor, CEPA, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She specializes in exit consulting for small business owners. Now, Julie's been an entrepreneur most of her life. She's a faculty member and regular content contributor with the Exit Planning Institute and winner of EPI's Thought Leader of the Year 2 times in 2017 and again this year, 2022. Julie recently released the second edition of her book, Poised for Exit, A Woman Entrepreneur's Guide to Business Transition. Her weekly podcast, also the same name, Poised for Exit, can be found on all major podcast platforms. On a personal note, Julie and her husband, Sean, have 8 children and 10 grandchildren. I can't believe she's had time to write all these books and do this podcast with all that going on. Welcome to Maximize Business Value, Julie.
Well, Tom, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your background and why you became a certified exit planning advisor and what got you on the path to working with entrepreneurs.
I think it takes one to want to work with one. I'm not sure, but I think that that's probably my biggest motivating factor. I've been a business owner my whole life. I went through my own transition that wasn't so successful, could have been better. Going through a life change at the same time, getting divorced from my husband I was married to for 23 years, and we owned several companies together at the same time. And so it was a lot of transition at the same time. And I realized that, kind of fast forward through the process of that, becoming a consultant in 2010, and then becoming a certified exit planner in 2015, I just really wanted to help business owners have a better outcome than I did, and understand that there actually is a process, and that the most important thing is to have really good advisors on your team, which I did not have. And I didn't know that, but I do now. So that's kind of what motivated me to start doing the work that I'm doing and where I came from.
So that's a lot of stress points in 1 year.
It was, yeah. And I launched my business the same year too.
Oh my goodness. That is too many stress points. So you've been an entrepreneur basically your whole life. And I think you're right. Your comment, it takes an entrepreneur to work with an entrepreneur sometimes is true. I've done the same. I've been an entrepreneur most of my life, and sitting across the table from other entrepreneurs, it just gives us something that the other entrepreneurs gravitate to because we've been there, done that. Do you find that to be the case?
Yeah, all the time.
That's awesome. So what was the inspiration for writing the book? While you were speaking there, I went and dug it off of my my pile here. It's a great read.
There it is.
What was the inspiration for the book? It's called Poised for Exit, a Woman Entrepreneur's Guide to Business Transition.
Well, I obviously, we talked about my background a little bit in consulting and then getting into exit planning. And I've always liked doing workshops and speaking and teaching and things like that. And And I was already, at that point, I was already a faculty member for the Exit Planning Institute, but I knew that I really wanted to get out there and do more speaking. So I signed up to take some classes. It was called the National Speakers Association Academy. And so I went through the academy. And as I went through the process of learning how to be a better public speaker, I was strongly encouraged by two of my instructors to write a book. And they felt that I'd been doing what I was doing for long enough, and I have a long history of stories to tell, right? So I just said it's a perfect segue for you to be able to get into doing more speaking and teaching and training, and it lends credibility to your work when you have a published book. So that was the impetus behind it. And then as I was writing it, I realized that I do have stories, and I think I have a lot more than what I actually told in that book, but I'm saving those for the next one. And my publisher just said that he feels like the book is as long as it should be, because entrepreneurs don't have a lot of time to read and their attention span is short. So
Yeah.
Anyway, so we made
I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. When I compare the size of our two books, they're about the same, right? And and I didn't need a publisher to tell me that. I know as an entrepreneur that I have a very short attention span. And so I wanted to write a book that the average entrepreneur could read on a 2 or 3 hour flight somewhere.
Right.
Because that's when I stuffed my briefcase with a book or two, and so that was the plan. I think it's exactly the right length. Now, what year was it first published? Because I must have. Is this the second edition book?
That is the second edition. Yeah, the first edition was published right as the pandemic was rolling out, so in very early 2020. Yeah, and I had all of my speaking engagements canceled. For the book launch included. I had a very extensive launch party planned at a very posh building in downtown Minneapolis. I had corporate sponsors, I had music, I had vendors, I had food, and yeah, it was just going to be so groovy.
Wow. Yeah.
And all the sponsors, because I had sponsors that were part of the publishing process in the book, and so we had to cancel all those things. And I still had some speaking engagements, but they were all online. And of course, none of them were paid because nobody was getting paid to do webinars in those times. So then I thought, well, okay, if we're not going to be able to get out there and see people in person, then we might as well continue to do this virtual thing. And so I launched the podcast show about 2 months later. I was going to wait until 2021 to actually launch the show. And I chose to do it in 2020 instead, just because I had all kinds of extra time.
That's totally my story as well. We launched I recall at the beginning of the pandemic that I was at a client site when I heard the news that the judge here in Dallas was basically shutting down, the whole area. And so, everybody was basically ordered to, shelter in place or whatever they called it at the time. And I came home, and the next day I had a call with my team, and I said, guys, I just bought back 12 to 15 hours a week of windshield time. What are we going to do with this time? And so someone said, well, you've always wanted to start a podcast. So we literally launched our podcast 10 days later. so similar story, similar time frame. And I guess I got lucky. Mine was published on January 2nd, 2020. And our launch party was like the 20th. So it was only about 6 weeks before the pandemic shut everything down. Of course, I didn't do it at a posh place, didn't plan it that way. I did it in my true fashion. We hosted it at my favorite local brewery.
That is perfect. I would have done the same thing if I hadn't had corporate sponsors. So
yeah, for sure. For
The
sure. Now,
expectation was definitely there.
Now, I love the organization of the book. Every chapter has a practical checklist at the end, and a broad resources section at the end of the book. I love that. I mean, it's some wonderful resources that you've included in the back of the book. Now, why did you specifically write it for women entrepreneurs?
hmm That's a good question. Well, because I have been one my whole life, and I did as much research as I possibly could to try to find something that had ever been written on exit planning for women entrepreneurs, and there's nothing. And there are millions and millions of them in this country, and it's a grossly underserved population, which is really sad. Yeah. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to differentiate the book and write it from my own perspective. Although I have to say, from what I know, the majority of the people reading the book are men, which is fine because the process of exit planning is the same. Really doesn't change any way between men or women. But when it comes to like considering key stakeholders, when it comes to considering what your next act is going to look like, that one especially, because I've lived it and because I have had clients who have lived it, it felt to me like a story worth telling that hasn't been told already. And whenever I've had women entrepreneurs actually read the book, they just can't believe how much it resonates with them and that they've never read anything like it before when it comes to women entrepreneurism and thinking about a transition. Because, yeah, and like I said, the process isn't any different, but there are definitely nuances.
Yeah, I can tell you, speaking as a male entrepreneur, that I found it gripping and every bit as good as any woman might think it as well. And so I know that it says that in the title, but that's interesting that you say most of the readers are men, and I think that's awesome. I love the fact that you've written it from the perspective that you did, but genuinely, as someone who's already read it, it's written for anybody. It is written for anybody. And I think you're right. That is a wildly underserved marketplace. It occurred to me just early in my exit planning career, which started only 4 years ago in 2019, that our practice was attracting and retaining more women entrepreneurs than men. And it was just surprising to me. I'd say currently the split is 60% female entrepreneurs and 40% male entrepreneurs. But I'm going to be getting copies of your book to give to my clients as well, both men and women alike. So I wanted to just clarify that, since it says it's a woman entrepreneur's guide, but it's really anybody entrepreneur guide to exit planning. Would you agree with that?
For sure. Absolutely.
Awesome. Now, in what ways has your practice grown through the years?
Well, I started out doing business consulting and business coaching in 2010. Prior to that, owned those companies like we talked about. And then, and it was more smaller companies that I was working with as a business coach. But we the process was to bring them through a strategic planning session and work with a strategic plan to drive, business enterprise value and to drive improvement and strategic growth. And, working with the leadership team, all of those kinds of things, anything that impacts, the value and impacts the efficiency and operations of the business. And so I realized that the clients that I was acquiring were smaller than what I really wanted to work with. Their resources were limited and their desire for doing what, I would deem as essential was not quite there. And so I switched and moved my target market, if you will, from like Main Street businesses to lower middle market. And I've basically stayed in the lower middle market space, which is kind of a big range, right?
Yes.
Depending on who you ask, some people say, well, lower middle market starts at 10 million, and others will say, oh no, it starts at 50 million. And others will say, no, it starts at 5 million. So I'm right around, most of my companies are right around 20 or 30 million a year in revenue. They're large enough to to know and understand the importance of working with an outside advisor like you, like me. They're familiar with paying for professional services, and they're not afraid to do that when they know that the value will bring back exponentially more than what they spend. And so they switched my model at that point, especially when I started doing exit planning work seriously. And I say seriously, I think it took the first year for me to just kind of figure out who's on my team, who's my client, just kind of fine tuning what I'd been doing and meeting more advisors with more sophistication. So, and what does that look like? Well, there were people that I had in my network that I enjoyed working with, that I would refer clients to occasionally, who didn't necessarily know or understand the process of transition planning. And I realized, after a small period of time that I needed to rethink who my collaborative team was going to be. And so over time, I spent time working on that, building my network of professional advisors who worked in the lower middle market, who had experience in transition planning, who actually worked with business owners. It's amazing, how many advisors will be out there and they'll go to networking things and they'll say that they work with business owners, but they really don't. They just want to.
Right.
Yeah. And so that, the proof is in the pudding, right? And so I realized that working on case studies with people that I thought were a good fit was a really good start. And so that they'd be able to see how I work, I could see how they work, and then we could bring the advice that they brought to the table back to the client. And many times that resulted in an engagement.
Oh, no kidding. No kidding. Yeah. So how do you define that lower middle market? 5 to 50, 5 to 100?
Yeah, I'd say 5 to 50 is definitely lower middle market. I don't know about 5, maybe 10. The value of the dollar keeps dropping. Yeah. So
right. I know that. Yes, I know that EPI, the Exit Planning Institute, defines it as kind of 5 to 100. I've always thought of it more as like 20 to 100. But to me, I segment even that smaller group into two different classes. 5 to 20 million, I call small business, and basically 0 to 5 million, I call them micro businesses. And so, but we work kind of in the same general area. Our typical clients are up to 100 million in revenue, but that's not to mean that we don't have some outliers there as well. We've got one client that's 2 billion and one that's 4 billion in revenue, and so we do have some outliers, but their engagement looks very different than a $1 million engagement, right? And so,
absolutely, yeah. The smaller companies, the ones you call micro businesses, those are your mom and pop shops. Like I said, Main Street businesses. Yeah. The problem really is that the vast majority of the businesses in this country are those businesses, and they're vastly underserved.
Yes. Well,
they're so bent on the day-to-day and working in the day-to-day that they don't lift their head up and look at the future and think about, okay, what's next, and how do I go about facilitating my own transition? They don't even know where to start, and they can't find the resources. So I always find that to be a problem that's worth trying to solve in some way.
For sure. We do classroom setting for small entrepreneurs, where we teach sort of in a classroom setting, a mastery class, if you will, over the period of a year. But we also do work with small clients. To me, it's ability to be able to carve out the time and the focus on it. And so I don't care, the size of the business, as long as we're making progress. I hate to work with clients that are not committed to the process and making progress. It's not worth the time or the effort for either one of us, right?
I know. Yeah. And that could be companies of any size.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Can you give us a client story where you brought them from sort of a mess to success?
Sure, sure. um, well, quite a few, right? I'm sure you have a lot of
Oh,
stories
yeah.
yourself. There's one that comes to mind that when we talk about the 5Ds, this particular client was suffering from several of the 5Ds all at once. Okay. And so for the listener, the 5Ds is it's a term that we use in exit planning, and it stands for things that can happen to you in life that you don't necessarily plan for, but they happen, like death, divorce, disability, disagreement, disaster, and what did I miss? Disability,
I
disagreement.
think that's it. That was five.
That's five, yeah.
Yeah.
And so this particular business, the husband and wife team, she was she had been involved in the business, but wasn't that involved in the business. And her husband ended up having a stroke. And so she ran the business while he was going through his rehabilitation. And he was a super healthy guy, not very old. I think like early 60s when it actually happened, or late 50s. His prognosis was that over 2 years that he would be fully recovered, or was expected to be, and that everything would be, back to normal, and she could, go back to her whatever she was doing before. I believe she was a teacher at a college, and she wasn't able to do that because the prognosis didn't come to pass, and he was still severely disabled after over 2 years. And so she found me through a family acquaintance who was an exit planner in the DC area, and she was based in Minneapolis. And so this guy made connection, and we started working together. So they were disabled, right? There wasn't a death, but there was definitely a disability that caused them from being able to continue with the business. They did suffer from disagreement because the husband and wife weren't agreeing on how to go about transitioning the business. He was optimistic that he was going to get better, so he didn't want to sell. And she knew they needed to sell because their life was really upside down, and they were having to modify everything. We had a little bit of a disaster during the period of time while we were going through pre-due diligence, and that was in that we couldn't find the documents that we needed that the investment banker was requiring that we submit. So the organizational documents, the corporate documents, shareholder agreement, you name it, everything, couldn't find it. And he didn't remember where any of it was. It wasn't in their safe deposit box. Their accountant didn't even have a copy, who happened to be their accountant for I don't know how many years. I just couldn't believe it. Yeah. Wow. I'm trying to think, what else did they go through? Just about a divorce. No. Anyway, it was just really kind of a trifecta of a storm, and then on top of it all, they ended up having an employee descend because he wanted to buy the business. We knew he wasn't qualified to buy the business, and he threatened to leave and take the book of business, and they did not have any kind of non-compete in place for him.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and this was a cash cow business. So anyway, that's what we were facing, all of these things. And my client was extremely stressed out. So fast forward, after we worked with an investment banker, and she and I worked on strategy to retain the key people, retain the customers, the investment banker, who just ran an amazing process. I can't say enough about him. Ended up with this spreadsheet with 10 letters of intent. Well, they actually had more than 10 letters of intent, but they narrowed it down to 10. And then all of the offers were listed on this spreadsheet based on each of the organizations. And then he kind of ordered it in according to what he thought, was kind of descending in terms of the best offer to the maybe not the best offer at the end, right? And so we narrowed it down to 3 from there, and then she ended up actually selling to a publicly traded company. So yeah, and so as far as I know, I think she's doing really well, but it was a huge burden lifted off of her shoulders. to be able to sell it at a premium, sell it for, it was mostly cash. Some of it was financed, and she had to carry very, very little. It was just a small amount that she had to carry. Plus they paid her a salary for a year and she didn't have to be there. So kind of a long story, but really, they don't always end up that way, where they start out that messy, but that was a gratifying story to know that she could now just spend her life focusing on taking care of her husband and hopefully get him better.
Boy, that's a great success story. And, but I find that it's not that uncommon. Now, that was a mess, right? I mean, that was a fairly substantial mess. It's not uncommon for it to be messy at the beginning, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's almost always issues, right, that you have to work on. But for this particular situation, they had done a lot of things right within the business itself, which was why it was so profitable.
Good.
And so the business was set up really well. It was just the two of them as owners that weren't. And then they ended up getting hit with these uncontrollable variables, right?
Yeah.
And that life happens to us.
Yeah.
So
that's everybody, right? I mentioned, I think on a prior podcast, that I got a call recently from an attorney representing the estate of a business owner that had passed away, and it had been almost 3 months since the owner had passed, and nobody had done anything with the business, and the business was just falling apart, right? I mean, and but that's the thing that business owners don't think about, the death, disability, divorce, the 5 Ds. Those things are wreak havoc in any business. Now, if you're willing to be a little more vulnerable with us, I mean, that was Superwoman's story, right? And you help them kind of get through that. Is there maybe another story that didn't go so well, and maybe tell us why?
Sure. I've had a couple client stories that didn't go very well. And I always have to sit back and assess, okay, what could I have done differently? And I always ask that, what could I have done differently? But in both situations that I'm thinking about, they're both family businesses. The patriarch of the business was very successful, technically speaking, very committed to, the continuity of the business and carrying on the legacy. So very good attributes. However, neither of the situations was this particular person a good leader. And leading is huge, especially if you're going to be leading through a future transition. And I think one of the situations, the owners were younger, and so they were more setting themselves up for a future acquisition on the buy side versus the sell side. But they couldn't get past this one leader of the business, and they were all siblings, who was actually the named CEO of the company, but did not act like a CEO at all. He had a lot of anger issues, and it was really tough because there was so much that I could do there, but I really couldn't. And everyone was afraid of him except me. And he didn't like it that I wasn't afraid of him. And so we parted company. Anyway, yeah. And then the other one, he had a lot of health issues. His wife really wanted him to work on a transition plan, but he couldn't think of leaving the business. He could not think of relinquishing control. And so what he wanted me to do was to help him put together an exit plan, but not get anybody in the company involved. And I said, I can't do that. That's not the work I do. There's no way that I would be able to help you with carrying on the legacy if I don't get to know your team. Right?
Right.
I have to know your team. Otherwise, whatever we decide or write down doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work, because we have to know who all the players are. And so that one didn't work out either. But otherwise, it's been a good run.
Awesome. I've actually had a client part ways with me over at one point. They looked at me and said, I feel like you're micromanaging me. And I said, I am micromanaging you because you're not doing the things that we agreed to do. So, and that caused us to part ways. But we're still friends and dog. So one of these days we'll get back into it. It's time. Let's take a quick break. We're talking with Julie Keyes. We'll take a break and we'll be back in 30 seconds.
Every business will eventually transition, some internally to employees and managers, and some externally to third-party buyers. Mastery Partners equips business owners to maximize business value so they can transition their businesses on their terms using our 4-step process. We start with a snapshot of where your business is today. Then we help you understand where you want to be and design a custom strategy to get you there. Next, we help you execute that strategy with the assistance of our amazing resource network. And ultimately, you'll be able to transition your business on your terms. What are you waiting for? More time? More revenue? If you want to maximize your business value, it takes time. Now is that time. Get started today by checking us out at www.masterypartners.com or email us at info@masterypartners.com to learn more.
We're back with Julie Keyes, a certified exit planning advisor and author of Poised for Exit, a woman entrepreneur's guide to business transition. Now, we've talked about your book, but can you also tell us a little bit about your podcast using the same name, Poised for Exit?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, like I said, when I launched the book, all my speaking engagements got canceled. And so I decided to launch the podcast right away, just like you did. And I had been doing some research and looking into different platforms, looking into different ways to produce it. And I decided that I just did not want to produce it myself. I wanted to host it, but I wanted to hire somebody to produce it, which I did. And the producer of the show has been very helpful. He's been in the radio business and podcasting business for a long time. And he's been very helpful in teaching me some things and, encouraging me on, getting sponsorships and things like that. And changing up the content, making sure I have a good intro and outro and all that. My son wrote the intro and outro music. He's a music producer, so it's kind of fun to have that. The show itself is just an extension of the book and the work that I do. So it isn't all exit planning related. I try to mix in other things that business owners would be interested in, like health and wellness, like, just basic strategic planning, like long-term care insurance. So I've been trying to think about the different facets of business ownership, everything that a business owner would need to be thinking about and doing and working on, not only while they're growing the business, but also when they come to a point where they're ready to transition out. And so we have a variety of guests between advisors and business owners. We kind of alternate between advisors and business owners. The business owners come on and they tell us their story of, how they achieve success, whatever it is that they've done, whether they've been selling or buying, or they're still running the show. And then advisors get on and tell us about all of the things they know that can provide value for our listeners. So it's been really fun.
That's awesome. It's a great podcast. I've listened to several episodes myself, and it's definitely worth downloading and listening to. And so I would encourage you. You can find it anywhere that you find podcasts. And by the way, this week, since Julie is on our podcast, we're going to put a link to her podcast and also a link to how you can buy her book on our website this week. So be on the lookout for that. It'll also be in our newsletter on Friday. So I'm fascinated that did you say your son is a music producer? And so he wrote the music for it? I did not know that. And now I'm going to have to go and kind of arm wrestle my family because I have 3 family members. My wife is a professional musician.
There you go.
She's a college professor, has her doctorate in clarinet performance.
Wow.
And our middle daughter wrote the intro and outro for hers for her. My wife has a podcast as well, and our middle daughter wrote the intro and outro for hers because she's a composer,
Oh, wow.
and so and here I'm thinking, I paid for my music. I need to get some family involved in this.
Yeah, you do.
So and my oldest daughter works for Napster, so she's also tied into that whole music scene and what's going on. So yeah, you've inspired me, Julie. I'm gonna have to go take
Good.
action on that. So what's next for KeyeStrategies and Poised for Exit?
Hmm. Probably more speaking. Probably produce another online course. I've got a couple of online courses that I've produced. One of them lives in a learning management system through the RFN Academy, and then that's one more for advisors. And then the other one is just a basic business owner transition process. What is exit planning? Why is it important? Who's involved? Very basic. Really meant for advisors to use as a way to get their clients to take action. Because a lot of times the advisors are having a hard time getting their clients to take action. We know based on recent research that business owners are still dragging their feet. They're still not taking action. And it's up to the advisors to get them to take action. And many times it's just either not in their list of capabilities to do that, or they just don't have the bandwidth to do it. And so having something like that, third party that can actually help them move along through the process, understand why it's important, who's involved, and then the door is more open for the advisor to actually get the process started. And there's always cross-selling opportunities, regardless of what discipline you're talking about. So I think I'm probably going to do 2.0, that course, and maybe another book in the future. So that's
You said you've got more stories that you could put into a book. So,
yeah.
and you're a great storyteller, so you should write it. My second book actually will be coming out at the end of this series. My last podcast on this series, I sandwiched, folks already know this, I put my first book was the interview. Someone guest interviewed me for my book, my first book. My second book, I've also got a guest to interview me. It's the person who wrote the forward for my second book, which is coming out at the end of this series, which will be a lot of fun. And it is specific things business owners can do to improve business value. Like you, it's not all about the exit process on our podcast and in our books, but it's really about building long-term value in the business, because a business that has long-term sustainable value has all kinds of options that other businesses don't have. And so I will say that I'm a little jealous because I was not brave enough to put the word exit big bold on my book. It's in little tiny print right there. It's the subtitle. It says maximize business value, begin with the exit in mind. But it was only because when I wrote the book and I sent it to some of our clients to kind of get just some input, hey, how do you feel like this flows and whatnot? The working title for the book was The Case for Exit Planning, because it really kind of lays out why business owners should be thinking about exit planning all the time. I mean, from the beginning. And when I sent it to my clients, the reaction was great. They loved the content, but they said, if you ever bring a book into my office that says exit on the front of it, then you're fired. And of course, I think that is a little bit short-sighted. I have always, in my 100 transactions as a business owner, I have always told my employees that I'm not the last guy you'll work for in this company.
Right.
I am going to eventually sell this business or transition it to someone else. And business owners that think that it would be a surprise if they sell the business. Every employee on the planet knows that eventually the business owner is going to sell the business. So I just say
when they don't talk about it.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's really, interesting dynamic going on there. But so I'm a little jealous. I think I wish that I had been brave enough to name my exit right on the beginning. But before we go, can you share maybe a couple of tips on exit planning preparation with our business owner audience? Because that's what most of our audience is, business owners.
Yeah. Well, I think just always keep your eye on building enterprise value. I think that when we start thinking about exit, we can tend to take our foot off the accelerator. And when we take our foot off the accelerator, that can affect your multiple, especially if it goes on for a while. And I've seen it happen. I'm sure you have too. And so just keep your eye on building enterprise value. Work with really smart advisors who can do the heavy lifting for you. Don't try to DIY. Oh my gosh, right? You gotta have. And I think too, given the environment that we're in with the economy, kind of the uncertainty with where inflation is going to go and things like that. We got some business owners out there that are kind of concerned about that, rightfully so. But again, never take your eye off building enterprise value and weigh your options in terms of what's the lowest hanging fruit, what are the best opportunities that we have right now with the least amount of cash outlay. So there are ways to be able to grow without, spending exorbitant amounts of money, which no one wants to do right now. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything, right?
Right. I agree wholeheartedly. A growing business always will be more valuable than a flat or declining business. Find ways to be able to grow that business. And I've had, recently clients or prospective clients, kind of say, gosh, well, have I missed my opportunity to be able to sell? Because the market has cooled off in recent weeks and months. But my argument is there's always a market for a well-run, profitable business.
Yes, there is.
So if you focus on building that long-term value, when something unforeseen happens, or when you decide it's time, then you've got a much better chance of selling that business than you do if you aren't really focused on that long term. So I agree with you there. Well, one last business question. If you had to give, and I know you've given great advice already on this podcast, but this podcast is all about maximizing business value. And you just talked about that. What is the one most important thing you recommend business owners do to build value in their business?
Work with competent advisors.
Ooh, I like that. So
it really makes all the difference. I just had this conversation with a couple of other people. One was an advisor. The other one was a client business owner, a mutual client of both of ours. And we were just talking about the importance of working with really good advisors. And this particular business owner said, if I didn't have the advisors I have on my team, there's no way I would be where I am right now. And they had experienced fantastic growth. And so really, you and I are worth our weight in gold.
Oh, yes. And I, it's really funny. And I know your clients would tell you the same thing. The most common thing I hear from my clients on our monthly accountability meetings are, man, my business is running so much better. I'm having more fun. We're making more money. I mean, those are very common things to hear. And by the way, for each one of them, it was a struggle to get started, right? For all of our clients. Well, do I really want to invest this money, or am I going to get a return on this? But with very few exceptions, one I noted earlier, it really does pay to get competent advisors and folks that can really help you in your business. I love that. I think that may be the first time that advice has been given on this show. 130 episodes to get to that. I should have had you on earlier, Julie. but that doesn't get you off the hook. We always ask our bonus question. And so our bonus question is, what personality trait has gotten you into the most trouble through the years? And I'm really interested in the answer to this.
What's gotten me into the most trouble? Probably the fact that you kind of know where I stand on things, right? So I tend to be pretty bold and honest with people without being rude, without being condescending. But I definitely am open, and that's gotten me into trouble. Not everybody really wants to know, right? They might ask you, but they really don't want to know.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll couch an answer with, "Are you sure you want the answer to this question?"
Yeah. Well, if it's a client relationship, I just say, okay, well, you're paying me to be this person for you.
Yep.
And if it's tough information or whatever it is that I have to say, I'm going to preface it by saying, all right, if I didn't share this with you, I would be remiss. This is my job, right? But when it's somebody else that's not a client and they don't already know me, then I can seem a little East Coast for them, if you will. I'm just this sweet little Minnesota girl, right?
That's right. A little less Midwest, a little more East Coast. I got it.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. In one of my prior companies, we had a lot of clients in the Northeast, and I used to have to tell our support team that I know they're yelling at you, I know they're using foul language, but they're not angry with you. That's just the way they talk, right? And so
I'm not that bad.
That's right. Yeah, you're not that bad. Because trust me, I've seen all sides of that equation as well. So,
Yeah.
So Julie, this has been a great conversation. How can our viewers and listeners get in touch with you?
You can find me at poisedforexit.com. Poisedforexit.com.
Poisedforexit.com. Awesome. Thank you, Julie, for being our guest today.
Thanks for having me, Tom. It was a great time.
You can find Julie Keyes at poisedforexit.com or on LinkedIn. And of course, you can always reach out to me and I will be happy to make a warm introduction to someone who I admire a great deal in this space. This is the Maximize Business Value podcast, where we give practical advice to business owners on how to build long-term sustainable value in your business. Be sure to tune in each week and follow us wherever you found this podcast. That way you'll never miss another episode. So until next time, I'm Tom Bronson, reminding you to learn as much as you can about exit planning by reading books written by CEPAs like this one while you maximize business value.
Thank you for tuning into the Maximize Business Value podcast with Tom Bronson. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition on their terms. Learn more on how to build long-term sustainable business value and get free value-building tools by visiting our website, www.masterypartners.com. That's master with a Y, masterypartners.com. Check it out.
That was perfect. I wouldn't make any changes on that.